Welcome to the Green Jobs Pod. I'm your host, Leonard Adler. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, one of the things I'm particularly excited about on the podcast is to elevate and highlight people who are working on the front lines in the green and climate job space. So today I'm particularly excited to have as a guest on the podcast, Alexis Haass. Alexis is an international senior executive with more than 20 years of experience dedicated to business and climate issues, focused on developing strategy, innovations, sustainable products and services for business growth and business development. She has been a passionate advocate for climate tech, particularly in energy transition and industrial decarbonization, and has always leveraged her work to scale emerging technologies. Alexis spent her career across both B2C and B2B, first leading Adidas's brand sustainability program as Director, Business Strategy and Business Development, and later as the founding Chief Sustainability Officer at Arcadis, a global design, engineering, and infrastructure firm. Alexis is also a member of the EU Women's Climate Leadership Network at the European Investment Bank and a global fellow at the League of Intrapreneurs. Alexis began her career with 5 years in international development, both in Washington, D.C. and in country, and is fluent in English, German, Spanish, and French. Born in Boston, Alexis currently resides with her family in Munich, Germany. Alexis has an MBA in marketing and MS in sustainable systems from the University of Michigan, as well as a BS in foreign service, international relations and policy from Georgetown University. And that's one thing we have in common. I have a degree from Georgetown. I went to Georgetown University Law Center. So without further ado, it's great to welcome Alexis to the podcast. So to get things started, one thing I think is really helpful for listeners is just to hear your story. You've obviously done so many different things in green and climate.
Well, I come from a family who are in the medical profession. So I guess it was not unusual to think that you're supposed to be doing something to improve the world with your day job. But then figuring out what that was still something to decide back then. That's what led me to, after being in DC, decide to go into international development. And actually, being on the ground in DC, it started to feel like a lot of the money in international development wasn't leaving the city. And so I wanted to see who was doing the good work on the ground, and that brought me to Nicaragua. What I wound up seeing was, though, actually most of the challenges that I was working with were caused by decisions, totally legal and totally consensual, that were made between companies and governments and the locals in the area, that just quite frankly were not long-term in nature and were not sustainable. And so it started to occur to me that it would be more productive working with companies on long-term strategies where you could kind of get a win on all sides, triple bottom line. So that's what brought me back to University of Michigan. They had a dual degree program. It was a little unusual at the time to think that you would combine sustainability and business. But I did that. And I guess I should say that was back in 2004. I might be dating myself, but back then, sustainability didn't quite have the cachet it might have now. Renewables certainly were not as cheap then. There was no Tesla out there. So when I graduated, there still seemed to be a need to actually make sustainability something where there was a demand pull for. I mean, consumers are essentially voters with dollars. And I was hoping that actually if we could generate enough demand through some of these, B2C kind of companies and reclassify sustainability as just better. It'd be desirable, it would be innovative, higher performance, simply better on all fronts, then actually we'd be able to kickstart a real demand curve that would pull us on the right track. That eventually wound up bringing me to Adidas because the London Olympics were going to be the first sustainable games, the first green games. And they were looking to try and figure out, okay, well, how will we approach this through product, through innovation? And that was the first time the Olympics were really confronting this. And I had a lovely multiple years at Adidas. I didn't realize I would come in working on Olympics, then move to work on innovation topics, then work on sustainable product across the scope, supply chains, and eventually go to market topics even, and strategy. So I had a lovely time working with Arcadis. And over that time, what I was looking for really did come true. There was a real shift in what was seen as desirable. I mean, you know, you saw the boom that came through what Tesla was able to position, and that um, became common across companies like Adidas, Nike, and all of these companies. And now, though we had reached that, we seem to be hitting a ceiling in terms of what the demand itself could pull through the system. In 2019, it started to feel like actually there were some fundamental infrastructure issues in energy transition and in industrial decarbonization that were just sort of getting stuck. And quite frankly, without those shifts, we wouldn't be able to reach the deep decarbonization that we needed to do. And so I was thinking this more to myself, had not really anticipated leaving Adidas. In 2020, of course, COVID happened, the whole world shut down. And I was on maternity leave at the time with my little son inside. And so I was just enjoying engaging with people about this big drumbeat that was starting to start of, well, we could actually restart the economy, kickstart the economy by building back better. We could do the green infrastructure that we all need. And at the time, Arcadis was looking for its first chief sustainability officer. And when they reached out, it seemed like a really great fit. So I came to Arcadis. I started building the program around both the internal needs for the company in terms of what sort of education would we need inside of our workforce. We had deep vertical experts in key areas, but sort of the broad base of sustainability, the broad topics, how to engage with also our customers on that front. That was something we needed to do. I also wound up working with the global business areas on developing what is their plan for developing their sustainable solutions. What sustainable solutions do our customers need? And then, it was also a time in which we needed to figure out, well, how could we help our key clients actually turn into a ladder of improvement over time? So how do we be able to assess where each company is on their journey and actually help them move forward, and then connect them with the right kind of climate tech solutions that were coming out? So these were all really exciting things to do in that space. As I came through that time at Arcadis, I just started to fall in love a bit more, actually, with the climate tech solutions that I was seeing and the very cutting edge stuff. So as of this August, I am no longer with Arcadis. I will be moving on. I'm taking a couple of months to actually do an even deeper dive into the climate tech space, but I anticipate I will wind up moving more towards this area because, it has been incredible to see how fast and how far our economy has come. And actually, there seems to be a special moment right now when it's all actually ready to take off.
Wow. That's an amazing story. So appreciate you sharing that with us. And I think one thing that's notable is that you've been in the field for a while. And so being able to have that longer view, like you said, you've seen the world before there were electric vehicles, for example, right? And
Yeah.
so, and I'm in a similar position where I've been doing this for a good long time. And I think there's definitely a number of interesting things about your story that I think are useful for the audience, and I think one of them, I'm curious if you could share just how you've viewed things as having changed from when you've started to now, and you've obviously spoken about how some of what you've seen has impacted your own career choices and kind of what you're going to be potentially making some other things going forward, but how you kind of describe the field as a whole or changes that you've seen.
Well, saying the field, so to speak, there's many ways in which I could sort of classify that. I guess when people look at my resume, they would typically think of someone in corporate responsibility. And that, I think, as a segment of work has evolved dramatically over time. And there were, I guess, in the beginning, a very sort of compliance-driven need about health and safety sort of topics that was a little prior to my time that was getting kicked off. And there's a lot of great fundamental groundwork that was done then. And I got lucky to get sort of on the escalator, on the elevator, so to speak, right at a time when it just started to become somewhat accepted within business that you actually could win on all fronts. You could actually, you could do well by doing good, was a phrase that was kicked around a lot at the time. And what people needed within business was people to bring in the kinds of insights, the knowledge that where is the world going? What are the trends that are coming on, both on the sort of environmental and social sides? What's happening? What will be coming towards us? As well as how are people reacting to them? How are clients reacting to them? What are the trends in terms of cost? What are the new concepts that are coming out in terms of circularity, in terms of regeneration? All of these topics were sort of just coming in, and the folks inside who are working in sustainability and corporate were often acting as translators and catalysts inside the company. That is a great job to have. You know, it is really fun and exciting because, quite frankly, you work with every aspect of the business, and essentially you're kind of just doing strategy and strategy execution work, because it's just really asking, what's the next future of the business? Like, what's the next product we need to make? What's the next thing we need to do with the known constraints of fitting this future that we see coming? The field has continued to evolve. There was an intense boom sort of in the 2020, 2021 space where, like we say, the whole economy kind of settled down. And then as people went into this frenzy of realizing, well, we need to build it back and we want to build back better, they were looking around for people to tell them how. So I think that was when a time when perhaps a lot of the listeners were starting to hear this come up all the time. And then a lot of these topics were just starting to come up again. All of a sudden, the old was new again. And people said, did you know you could do well by doing good? And I was like, oh, yes, I'm really glad that more people think that now. So, but the greatest thing about it was by then the economics really had changed. And so making the business case was always a core part of the job, but it was just frankly easier at this point in time. That being said, we're hitting a new moment. There is legislation primarily in Europe, but very much in some aspects in the States, and just commitments globally. For example, in China, there are 5-year plans. There's legislation like CSRD in Europe that, quite frankly, is requiring companies that have any presence in Europe to report on their targets, on parameters of how exposed they are to various areas and segments of impact, and then to disclose on that. Probably not to my preference. That is causing a bit of a turn back in the sector, a bit more of a momentary scramble of people being kind of going a little bit more into bean counting at the moment of how do we track down every piece of impact to meet the legislation. There will be massive benefits to this in terms of just transparency, disclosure, uniformity. That being said, what I look forward to is when everybody takes a breath, has digested this a little bit, and then gets back into the sort of the strategy, the business development, the new products and services, which is the most exciting part of doing the work. And I hope that is where this segment, so to speak, is going back to.
Great. No, that's you covered a lot of ground, including things across continents. So that's great. Definitely appreciate that. I think another thing in your story that I'm curious about is you've worked in large institutions, and at least from what you described, you were very proactive in trying to make change. You were describing everything from customers, other stakeholders, and what you done. And I think many people can relate to the challenges in making change, really in any organizational setting, but certainly potentially larger ones may have their own distinct challenges. I'm curious um, what was your perspective? Kind of like how did you do it? And then if there's advice you'd have for someone listening, if they're having a similar challenge, if they're working in a job today or some maybe tip they can keep in mind in the future, advice you'd have on how they could tackle that kind of challenge as well.
Mm, there's a couple of points that come to mind, so let me sort of tick them off as I go through them. But first and foremost, it seems really critical that you need to motivate people around this topic. It is not yet, although it's approaching very fast, that this is the single sole most important focus of the company. And so people need to sort of see a vision of what the future looks like, why that's appetizing, appealing, why they would want it, and where they fit within that. So really being able to kind of like craft that vision, share it, get people excited and motivated about it, that's sort of day one need. And you are blessed if you wind up getting a leader in your company at the top, be they on the board, be they on the executive leadership team, one who has a lot of control within the company, who shares that level of passion and commitment for the topic. So if you find them, you connect with them. I was really lucky to have had that each time. One time, both at Adidas and then also at Arcadis. In my first, Eric Lickey was president of brands, and then Peter was CEO Peter Osterbeer was CEO at Arcadis. The second thing, however, is pretty quickly, people need to just get some data, some understanding of facts, because things that sometimes feel really sustainable, they inherently feel it's logical that those would be sustainable. When you actually do out the math, aren't necessarily. And so having a level of specialization that comes in from, for example, life cycle analysis, or the sort of, emerging research that would come out, you actually need to discover and sort of do a baseline vetting and check of what is material to your organization, what matters, what you should prioritize first, and also be able to distinguish. Doesn't mean you don't do it all the time, but be able to distinguish between something that sounds really sustainable and something that is really sustainable. I'm more than happy later to tell a story about how you can sometimes use the thing that sounds or that feels really sustainable to pull the thing that is really sustainable along. You can pair those things up, but just don't get yourself mixed up in your priorities on that. And then I think the next thing that you need is to also really identify allies within a company. Who's your motivated folks? Because quite frankly, those are going to be the people who will do this job after hours on the side, over and above. And that's exactly what you need in order to move something forward and create change inside of a large organization. Is those are the people who they themselves will evangelize everybody else. And you got to find a way to find them pretty early on.
Great. Just had one question, and then I think the story that you were alluding to, I think it'd be great to go into that in terms of what sounds effective versus making sure it is effective. I think that'd be great to hear. Is there anything particular about culture? And I think whether that's for prospective employee to identify aspects of a culture, or if people who are listening are in positions to help shape the culture of a place that you think can make some material difference in how things unfold on the sustainability front.
If you can find, or if you can nudge in the direction of a culture that really values entrepreneurialism. Entrepreneurs are outside a company starting something new. Intrapreneurs are basically entrepreneurs, but inside a company. And because this is per definition not the standard way of doing business in your company, you're going to need the people who act as intrapreneurs to really bring forward different ideas, try, fail, move fast, bring a new solution, try again. And when you have a culture that gets excited about that gets excited about innovation, that gets excited about, trying to find solutions. And sometimes these are in shoe companies and they're, designers and engineers. And sometimes in engineering companies, those are they're not just the architects, they're the engineers and the, the people on site in construction places. It's not the type of job that you have, it's the attitude you have towards it that actually winds up putting you in this special category of people who just generate a gravitational field around them that catalyzes a new kind of energy. And out of that comes the great examples that inspire others in the company. It can be done. And then there's this lovely, sort of laddering up that happens on that. So that would be my primary aspect I'd value in a culture. There's many more, but that is, I feel like you can't do without.
Great. And I think connecting entrepreneurship with innovation and helping people kind of see that connection and almost pitching that internally, because I do think innovation is something that, more often than not, is viewed positively in terms of companies viewing themselves as being able to be successful in a competitive marketplace. Great. And I liked your comment about it's not necessarily the job you have, it's the attitude in the job you have. I think that's great to keep in mind for people. So if you wanted to describe kind of that story you were alluding to, that would be great.
For those who know the story of Adidas and sustainability, you might have heard about us creating, I say us, and I've not been in the company for many years, the ocean plastic shoes, the ocean plastic trainers, Parley trainers. And Adidas had a very special moment when it was just starting to do a collaboration with Parley for the Oceans. Parley for the Oceans is a smaller NGO that actually helped generate recycling and cleanup and awareness building for many of the small island nations around the world. And it is a great organization, and it also has a really compelling way of doing storytelling with beautiful imagery and great clarity. It's the kind of video and imagery that any branding company, Adidas is a brand and product company, would love. And people could connect to the issue that is littered beaches, birds choking on plastic, turtles, being stuck in rings. People could really connect to that imagery. And there was need to develop that kind of infrastructure on these islands. We did a collaboration with, or Adidas did a collaboration with the Parley for the Oceans. And what we're able to do, especially in the first generation of those ocean plastic trainers, was to pull fishing nets, to pull plastic bottles off of beaches, and actually managed to turn that into a performance running shoe. That was actually held up at the UN by Eric Liedtke saying, we're going to make 1 million of these. Now, he promised we're going to make 1 million of these without first knowing how we were going to do it. That being said, cleaning up beaches, quite frankly, would not give us enough plastic anyway to replace the main material that we had. Polyester is the main material of most sporting companies. It is essentially plastic, recycled bottles. Now, the most important thing is that you actually close the loop on all of this plastic and you use the lower emissions recycled plastic to be your material base that substitutes and keep that in a circular loop. But it doesn't really matter, actually, if you're taking that bottle off of a beach in Bali, or if you're taking it out of the recycling stream in an area, or generating more demand for recycling in an area that's, less photogenic. That being said, because people could connect to the imagery, we were actually able to connect this shoe, this ocean plastic trainer, to the commitment of, we're going to go 100% recycled polyester, and use that as the demand pull and the explainer to explain why doing 100% recycled polyester was a good thing, because it was recycled bottles. And when people thought recycled bottles, they thought of the turtles and the beaches and the birds. And so this is where, if you did a pure basis on LCA, if you just did it, what's the most important thing we needed to do as a step one in cleaning up our product and really decreasing the impact of our product, it would be go recycled. Yeah. But if you forgot the story, you wouldn't have created this sort of dynamism that actually was going on. And there's a funny little anecdote just to end this. There was a particular moment in time, it was short, but it was a particular moment in time where actually the Parley for the Oceans product line and the stories shortly were ranking higher than Kanye West shoes that were selling out for a period in time. It was also ranking higher than any of the Messi shoes, any of the football product that was out there. But this was the power of being able to tell a good story and connect it. And that has value as long as you don't confuse it with that being the only thing. You use it as a vehicle to make sure the most important big thing gets done.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And as I'm a runner, and so I actually remember now, as you're telling that story, I remember hearing about that shoe, and I think even seeing some of the other marketing or other imagery regarding kind of the ocean. So I think it's interesting to hear some of the backstory behind that, and also kind of your point that the story, you obviously can have a compelling story, but to make sure that it is connected to something with impact. So I think that's great. Great. So maybe you want to shift gears a little bit in terms of, given the diversity of experiences you've had, if you have advice for people that are trying to get into kind of green and climate jobs, if there's any particular advice you'd have for people.
You're going to have to be a little bit extroverted in the sense that you should talk to a lot of people. Literally, it is the connections that you make to different folks. And as long as you're sort of willing to try a path not trodden, if you're willing to even craft your own job description, then there's often even more pathways, and you might be able to find it from the place where you already are in the job that you already are at by seeing the need in your company and what your skill set matches to that. Or it's through connecting with a lot of different folks in this space. And that network kind of has its own gravitational field, so to speak. And sort of you talk to the universe and the universe talks back. Somehow, like doors open up that you didn't anticipate. That was certainly true for me. None of my jobs existed really before I had them. So, when I was going in first, just heading into my MBA and getting out thinking, where am I going to get a job? I had just read about a Newsweek article about Greenpeace activists going back and getting their MBAs and being able to work in companies and therefore, talk to both sides and find solutions on both sides. And I was like, that sounds like a good idea. So there was no job description that really said, oh, here, go apply here. And there certainly wasn't a line at the end of my MBA saying, here's the 15 companies you should apply to. It was all through sort of self-initiation. That being said, as long as you're comfortable with a more unusual career path, that perhaps not easy career path, you don't necessarily have to get locked into one box in this space either. It's how you see new opportunities emerging or new needs emerging and how your skills can apply, and then why you'd be relevant there and being able to talk to people about that. I had been spending years in footwear and sports. And I just felt, based on what I was seeing in our own company's supply chain and in the dynamics that I was hearing about through my own interests, of this sort of blockages that we're having in energy transition and industrial decarbonization. And so I just got pretty psyched about infrastructure. There was no rational, good reason why anybody should have hired somebody who spent years in footwear going to work in infrastructure. But, again, perhaps good luck on my part, Peter really saw that actually there were completely transferable skills in terms of what I had learned to do, what I initiated at Adidas, and therefore what I could do at Arcadis. And once I got into the job, I did realize that actually so much of what I needed to do was directly transferable. Again, you don't necessarily stay still in this space because you're always trying to move forward. And I'm pretty excited about the climate tech solutions that I'm seeing coming out now. I mean, stuff that's going on in batteries and storage heat batteries, that's incredible. Stuff that's going on in direct air capture and in the industrial decarbonization tech space is amazing. And so now being able to just talk to companies about, oh, well, this is maybe how I could help that problem. That is, again, just another same sort of progression along that way. What you cannot be is what's the term? A shrinking violet. Because then actually, it's not like people are going to come to you and say, here, I want you to have this job, and do this, because most of the time these jobs barely exist, or when they do exist, there's a line out the door for somebody wanting to. So probably the best way to get into it is to take the initiative yourself, to really figure out what you're good at, talk to a lot of people, and put in the extra time and the effort. I want to say one last thing, which I remember was really important. People say, go follow your passion, figure out what you're excited about. I have so many people that I mentor, and then some have come to me and said, I don't know what I'm passionate about. Like, how do I know what I'm supposed to be chasing and networking about? And I told them a story about what would happen to me when I was doing my MBA. I used to be super excited about renewable energy finance. I just was conceptually, I love the idea of renewable energy finance. And I was convinced in my first year of a 3-year program, that's what I was going to do. And yet, every time I was doing my homework and reading articles on that, I was falling asleep. And I was falling asleep on the couch. And so my body was telling me, wait, you're not interested in this. But yet, like, for example, now my most recent obsession about climate tech VC and new startups and scale ups, I'm listening to these podcasts while I'm doing dishes. It's the stuff that I read on my way to work. It's just sort of the stuff that you like anyway, that you're curious about, and that's how you can kind of get a sense of, oh, maybe I should go in that direction more. And then it's just a matching game. What can I bring to that maybe they might need, because I'm really excited about the thing itself.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of great things that I think the listeners will be able to take away, including the importance of being proactive, for example. That's critical. And then also, I think the fact that it's not a straight line, I think is also great to hear, just your story. And then obviously kind of as you've kind of described it just now, kind of in a summary manner, that, you put in the work, whether it's for networking, doing your homework, staying on top of the news, you put in the work, and it's not necessarily by the end of that same day, is there a job offer? But if you keep putting in the work, you will see the results. And it's from an accumulation of all the steps that you've done over time. And so both in terms of how you're successful in the job search, and then also, again, keeping in mind that it's not linear, that, what you do today might not directly lead to the thing tomorrow. It might be part of what you do 2 or 3 things later in the future. And for people to kind of, keep that in mind. So I think those are definitely really great points, people. But as you were describing some things, there's actually something else I wanted to ask you again, is, I'm hearing your enthusiasm and your passion and your excitement, as you're talking about some of the things, whether it's, in the climate tech VC, specific clean technologies. kind of I'm curious, kind of, thinking about sustainability at an individual human level, in that you've been in this field, you've been working for a while, and kind of how have you kept up your own personal sustainability in terms of not getting burned out and keeping up that enthusiasm, that passion, and that energy, which at least to me it seems clear that you have it, and it's
Yeah.
amazing to see.
Um, One side note, which perhaps a personal story to go with this, my mom used to joke when I was little that it was a good thing I was born now, and would go into something like, being a human rights lawyer, or eventually what I wound up in, like sustainability, because she said, otherwise, if you were born in the 1400s, you might have been like, Joan of Arc, like going around with your sword on the leading the charge. And it's you do need a bit of a personality tick that really makes you want to, that gets energy actually at uh, like a quest or a goal, and a ambition, a vision that you want to go towards. So otherwise, because there will be a lot of, you need a certain amount of resilience to actually do this, because you also get to see, in fact, if you're in this space for any period of time, you also get to see a lot of the news that can be really scary, really tiring. And then 9 out of your 10 days, something that you try isn't going to work out, and it's going to take twice as long, and it's going to be half as ambitious, and somebody's going to say no, and then you get a setback, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps back, and then 2 steps forward again. So you should have the constitution there, and whatever it takes for you to do that. Some people do it through sports and through running, that it helps, recharge that battery. I have a couple of different things that actually help me check out, because I really need to check out, like painting uh, and gardening. And I happen to have a 4 and a 7-year-old, and they're hilarious. And they actually, the kinds of conversations that I have with them have nothing to do with whether or not the price of energy is now at parity, such that we can have, heat batteries installed in our to replace natural gas boilers. So like that really helps. And as long as you can make sure that you design a life and a job that enables you to have time for that, I can be in a senior executive and still see my kids at the end of the day. And I need that if I'm going to keep doing this. So whatever it takes for you, then make sure you just clear out the space for that. I need my gardening, need my painting, a little bit of exercise, and some wacky kids. Yeah.
That's great. No, I think being mission driven, which again clearly you are, and throughout your career, and then making sure you're taking time for yourself and sustaining yourself through this. As you mentioned, there's going to be ups and downs, and being resilient. So I think that's really great to hear. So
Mm.
great. So I think we've covered a lot. So again, really appreciate your time today. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you wanted to share?
Well, I just hope with everybody here, they realize like what a unique moment in time it is. So if you were thinking of being on the fence, like the water's warm, come on in, because we have a very unique tipping point now in where the economy is going to go. It is profoundly inevitable now, based on what has shifted in economics and shifted in the technologies, that we are going to make this transition to net zero. In fact, there's a fascinating study by Oxford University that has showed, it's based on the learning curves that happen through certain technologies, that it is actually cheaper at this point in time, not accounting for the human health benefits, not accounting for the savings that you do for climate, but it is just cheaper based on the technologies right now for us to go through a faster transition than a slow one. So we're at a unique moment in time. That being said, are we going to get through that very small keyhole fast enough? Because it has to hit by a certain time period. So in order for us to avoid any climate tipping points and all the consequences that come from that. And so what I would say is, I kind of think about it like this is the moment in time when you get to be a hero in your day job. And everybody does. Literally everything you will do, every decision you will make, every um, product you will choose to support and not, everything right now will be consequential in how fast or not we go. And every way you choose to dedicate your skills. If you're not struggling for subsistence at the moment and just barely getting by, if you have the opportunity to choose the kind of work that you want to do, I would jump on trying to figure out a way to transition. Even if you just want to be selfish from the perspective of the economy's going this way, so you might as well get on the train fast. But at the same time, like that gets you up every day. That keeps you going when it's hard, when the job doesn't seem like something you want to do. Just thinking like, for my kids, every day I do something is like your hero in your day job. In infrastructure right now, anything you're going to build today will last at least 30 years. So anything you're building today needs to meet the standards of 2050, needs to meet how we're going to operate in 2050, but we have to build it right now. So there's nothing more like a moment of action, like right now. And so if you're kind of on the fence or say like, I'll do these things and then later when I've got a couple more things under my belt, no, there is no time like the present. So just, switch on over, then go tell your friends how easy it was and pull them on too.
Yeah, no, that was wonderful in terms of articulating, I think, for people that now is the time, and to be able to dedicate yourself. There's really a moment in time, and you can meet this moment if you choose to be a part of this. So just want to thank you for all the contributions you've made, in this field, and for taking the time today. So, and we'll have, again, to learn more about Alexis, we'll have information in the show notes. So again, definitely want to thank you for being on the Green Jobs Pod today.
It was such a pleasure. And actually, thank you so much for what you're doing, because this is going to help pull people on over into this space. So I'm so glad we got a chance to talk.
Oh, same here. All right. Thank you, Alexis.
Take care.